I thought love was supposed to feel like safety, like coming home after a long, chaotic day and finding everything exactly where it should be. But what I learned was that sometimes the person you build your world around is the very one quietly tearing it apart. It didn't happen all at once. No explosion, no betrayal with flashing signs. It was in the details, the subtle shifts, the silence where there used to be warmth. I never imagined I'd be telling this story, but maybe that's the thing about relationships. They don't fall apart when you're watching. They crumble when your back is turned. We've been married for 9 years. That kind of time puts you into routines so deeply worn they feel like skin. You don't question them. You move through life assuming loyalty, assuming honesty. And yet, looking back, there were signs. Missed calls that she shrugged off, nights when she stayed later than usual at work, her laughter becoming scarce at home while too frequent in text messages. But love makes you blind, not in a poetic way, but in a damaging, dangerous way. I was blind because I wanted to be, because the thought of questioning her felt like questioning our entire life. We had kids, a mortgage, memories etched into the corners of every room. You don't question something you've bet your whole future on. At least, not unless it starts screaming at you, and one day it did. It started with a forgotten phone. She left it charging in the kitchen, something she never did. I wasn't snooping. I just walked by and saw a message pop up. A name I didn't recognize. A message that didn't belong in a marriage. It wasn't explicit, not yet, but it was familiar in a way you only speak to someone when there's something more than friendship. I remember standing there, phone in hand, and time just froze. It wasn't the message itself, it was the implication, the tone, the unspoken. My stomach dropped like I'd been pushed off a cliff. I didn't say anything that night. I couldn't. I wanted to believe I was wrong, that there was some explanation, that maybe it was just a joke, a misunderstanding. But doubt once planted grows fast. It infects everything. Every word she said after that felt loaded. Every smile felt rehearsed. I started watching, not in a paranoid way, but like a man trying to wake up from a dream he didn't know he had been dreaming. And then I found more. Hidden photos in cloud backups. A hotel reservation made during a weekend. I was away with our son at a soccer tournament. The same name again, same face, same pattern. Suddenly, our life felt like a movie I hadn't watched from the beginning. I was dropped into the middle and expected to pretend I understood the plot. My hands shook when I finally asked her. I sat her down after dinner, after the kids had gone to sleep. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I just said her name and showed her the messages. For a second, just a heartbeat. She didn't deny it. Her face went pale, like she had been waiting for this moment and fearing it in equal measure. Then came the excuses, the predictable spiral. It wasn't serious. It didn't mean anything. It was just emotional, not physical. As if that made it better. As if betrayal measured in degrees didn't burn the same. I sat there listening, but not hearing. Her words bounced off the walls like echoes in an empty house. She cried, said she was lost, that she didn't know why she did it, that she felt unseen, neglected, taken for granted. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rage, but all I felt was numb. How do you process that the person who slept next to you for almost a decade was living a double life? How do you trust your own memories when they've been soiled by lies? I thought of every dinner we'd shared while she had that secret tucked in her pocket. Every "I love you" said while someone else occupied her heart. That night, I slept in the guest room. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because I couldn't breathe in the same space. The air felt thick with dishonesty. I stared at the ceiling and tried to rewind our life, scene by scene, searching for where it broke. And then came the worst part, the silence that followed. Not the absence of sound, but the silence of not knowing what to do next. Stay or leave. Fight or walk away. You think you'll know what you do in a situation like that, but you don't. You don't know until it's your hands shaking, your heart breaking, your life unraveling. The confrontation had happened. The truth was out. But that was just the beginning. What came next was the slow descent into myself, into questions I never wanted to ask, into emotions that twisted through me like thorns. I had no map, no guidebook for how to deal with the person you love turning into someone you don't recognize. And yet, I had to keep going for the kids, for myself, for whatever pieces of dignity I still had left. This wasn't just about her betrayal. It was about what it did to me, how it stripped me down to nothing, made me feel replaceable, made me feel like I had failed at the one thing I promised to protect, our family. That was the hardest pill to swallow. That maybe love wasn't enough. That maybe doing everything right still doesn't save you from the wreckage. Because sometimes the storm is already inside the house. And no matter how tightly you shut the doors, it still finds a way in. I wish I could say I handled it all with grace, that I rose above the pain and chose forgiveness like some enlightened version of myself. But that would be a lie. The truth is messier, uglier, and far more human. In the days that followed the confrontation, I unraveled in ways I didn't know were possible. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't look at her without replaying every lie she had told, every touch that now felt like a violation of trust. It's one thing to feel sadness, it's another to feel contaminated by someone else's decisions. The house that once held laughter and routine now echoed with tension and ghost like avoidance. We became two strangers orbiting each other, careful not to collide, saying just enough to maintain normalcy for the kids, but nothing more. I started avoiding home, working longer hours, sitting in parking lots just to delay walking through the front door. I hated that. I hated feeling like a guest in my own life. And yet, that's exactly what I had become, a bystander watching everything I built slowly decay. She tried to talk, apologized over and over, said all the right things about wanting to make it work, about being sorry, about not realizing what she stood to lose. But words after betrayal sound like background noise. Hollow, like someone tried to convince you the fire wasn't that bad while you're still smelling the smoke in your clothes. She cried a lot, not just for me, I think, but for herself, for the life she thought she was done with, but wasn't brave enough to fully leave behind. And maybe that's the most brutal part of it all, not just the cheating, but the cowardice. If you don't love me, leave. If you want someone else, go. But don't lie. Don't plant your roots in one home while watering another garden. That split loyalty rots everything. And it did. It rotted my sense of self. I found myself second guessing everything, my worth, my masculinity, my ability to see what was real. It wasn't just heartbreak, it was humiliation. And in that humiliation, I spiraled. I stopped taking care of myself. I withdrew from friends. I said I was fine, like most men do, while quietly suffocating under the weight of suppressed emotions. Society doesn't give men many tools for grief when it comes to relationships. You're expected to move on, to suck it up, to be strong. But strength isn't silence. Strength isn't pretending you're okay while your entire inner world collapses. I found myself crying in the car one afternoon, completely unprovoked, just overwhelmed by the weight of it all. Not because I missed her, not exactly, but because I missed the life I thought we had. I missed being able to trust someone fully. I missed the feeling of safety. And that's the cruel irony. You don't just mourn the person. You mourn the version of yourself that existed before the betrayal. The version who believed in the promise, who believed he was enough. That version of me died the night I saw that message. And in his place stood someone more cynical, more guarded, more afraid. But anger came too. Not the hot, explosive kind, but a cold, simmering rage that sat beneath my skin. I hated her for what she did. Hated that she didn't confess until I found proof. Hated that she only seemed sorry once she was caught. I questioned everything. Was it just one person? Was it really just emotional? Had happened before. Questions with no answers, only more pain. I couldn't prove anything beyond what I'd found, but it didn't matter. The trust was already gone. Trust isn't about what you know, it's about what you believe. And I didn't believe her anymore. I watched her sleep at night, wondering how someone who looked so peaceful could carry that level of deception. I wondered if she thought of him while lying next to me, if she compared us. If I had become just a default setting in her life, while he lit up the corners she claimed were too dark. I couldn't talk to anyone about it. Not really. I told one friend, just one, and even then I felt exposed, like airing out the failure made it more real. There's a certain shame that comes with being cheated on, even when you've done nothing wrong. It makes you feel weak, less than, like a man who couldn't keep his own home safe. But I had to hold it together. For the kids, for the job, for appearances. So I did what many do. I performed normalcy while bleeding inside. But something inside me was shifting. Slowly, day by day, the numbness turned into clarity. I realized I couldn't live like that, in limbo, between rage and regret, between hope and heartbreak. I needed to decide, not just for her, but for myself. Because staying in a broken home out of fear is its own form of self-betrayal. And I had already been betrayed enough. The decision didn't come in a dramatic epiphany. There was no lightning bolt, no sudden surge of courage. It was slow, like ice cracking underfoot, a realization creeping in after weeks of pretending I could carry on like nothing had happened. I was brushing my teeth one morning, staring at the reflection of a man I barely recognized. Hollow eyes, beard grown out, a weariness that clung to my skin like smoke after a fire, and I finally admitted it to myself. I couldn't keep living in that house, in that reality, where every room reminded me of her lies. Forgiveness wasn't impossible, but rebuilding required two people equally committed to the same foundation, and hers had already crumbled. What she wanted was for me to forget, to move forward without fully confronting the destruction. But healing doesn't come from denial. It comes from truth, no matter how ugly. And the truth was, I didn't trust her anymore. I didn't believe in us anymore. The love was still there in some twisted, stubborn way, but it was buried under so much debris it couldn't breathe. So I made the call. One Saturday morning, I asked her to meet me in the living room. The kids were out with their grandparents, and the silence between us was thicker than usual. She must have sensed something because she sat without a word, eyes already brimming with tears before I even began. I told her I needed space, not a separation masked as hope, but a real, physical pause, time away from the house, from her, from the history we had corrupted. She asked me if I was ending the marriage. I told her I didn't know yet. That was the most honest answer I could give, because leaving wasn't easy. We had intertwined our lives in ways that couldn't be undone overnight. And yet, staying felt like emotional suicide. I packed a bag that night, just the essentials, enough to get by for a week or two. I didn't know where I'd go, just that I couldn't sleep under the same roof as her anymore. That first night away, I stayed in a cheap rental on the outskirts of town. Sterile walls, unfamiliar bed, silence so loud it was suffocating. But for the first time in weeks, I could actually breathe. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of my own freedom. Heavy, yes, but strangely peaceful. In the days that followed, I started rebuilding. Not the marriage, not yet, but myself. I went back to the gym. I called old friends I hadn't spoken to in months. I started journaling, not because I wanted to, but because I had to get the chaos out of my head somehow. Every entry felt like stitching a wound I had been ignoring. I wrote about the betrayal, about the shame, about how her laughter had become a foreign language I no longer understood. And slowly, the fog began to lift. I remembered things I had forgotten, parts of myself I had buried to keep the peace in our home. Like how I used to love cooking, but stopped because she complained about the mess. Or how I used to play guitar on weekends, but gave it up when she said it gave her headaches. These little sacrifices, disguised as compromise, had chipped away at my identity. Until all that remained was the role I played. The husband, the provider, the dependable one. I wasn't mad at her for all of it. Some of it was my fault too. I allowed my edges to be smoothed into silence. I thought love meant giving everything, even at the cost of myself. But that's not love. That's martyrdom. And marriage isn't supposed to feel like slow self-erasure. She called me every day, texted me poems, old photos, apologies that came too late. I didn't block her. I didn't rage. I just didn't respond. Because healing requires distance. You can't stop bleeding if the knife is still in your side. And she, for all her sorrow, was still holding the handle. I missed the kids terribly. That was the hardest part. We arranged for me to see them during the week in parks or cafes or library corners, pretending like life wasn't unraveling at home. They asked questions I didn't know how to answer. When are you coming back? Did mommy do something wrong? I never spoke badly of her, no matter what, because children don't need the details. They just need love, stability. And I was determined to give them that, even if I couldn't give them the picture-perfect family anymore. I was angry, still hurt, but I wasn't going to poison their innocence with my pain. The world would do that soon enough. What struck me most in that first week away wasn't how much I missed her, it was how much I missed myself. The version of me that laughed without fear, that wasn't constantly checking for lies between the lines, that wasn't stuck in a loop of what did I do wrong. Maybe that's what betrayal really is, not just a shattering of trust, but a shattering of identity. You start to question if anything was ever real, if the person you loved ever really existed, or if they were just a projection of what you wanted to believe. And in that uncertainty, something remarkable began to form: clarity, a kind of rebirth, painful but necessary. Because sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what's actually worth keeping. Clarity doesn't arrive like a revelation. It arrives like dust settling after an earthquake, slowly, quietly letting you finally see what's been ruined and what might still be salvageable. In that clarity, I began to see just how far I had strayed from myself. I had become someone so focused on holding everything together, the job, the marriage, the image of a happy home, that I didn't notice the cracks forming beneath my own feet. And maybe that's part of why it happened. Maybe my absence, emotional, even if not physical, made space for her betrayal. But that doesn't excuse it. Marriage isn't a contract based on perfect performance. You don't earn loyalty with perfection. You earn it through presence, through effort, through honesty. And when one partner forgets that, the whole foundation shakes. She sent me a long letter in the second week, handwritten, pages and pages of her side of the story. She told me about how lonely she'd felt, about how unappreciated she was, about how the spark between us had faded and she didn't know how to ask for it back. She said the affair, if it could even be called that, as she put it, wasn't planned. It just happened. I hate those words. Nothing just happens. People make choices. They move toward a line and step over it one decision at a time. And when they say it just happened, what they really mean is, I didn't want to stop. Myself. She talked about the guilt, how it kept her up at night, how she wished I'd never found out, not because she wanted to keep lying, but because she didn't want to see me broken. But that's the thing about guilt. It's self-centered. It's about your pain at hurting someone, not their pain from being hurt. And reading her words, I realized she still didn't fully understand what she'd done. She was mourning the version of herself she had betrayed, not the version of me she had shattered. I didn't respond. I couldn't. What was there to say? That I appreciated her honesty? That I forgave her? That we could start over? The truth was, I didn't know what I wanted. Part of me still clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild something from the ashes. That maybe people really do change. That maybe love can survive even the deepest wounds. But another part, the louder, sharper part, told me that going back would be a form of self-betrayal. That staying with someone who had already chosen to leave me once, even temporarily, would mean living in permanent fear of it happening again. I started seeing a therapist. I never thought I'd be the type to do that. I always believed I could handle things on my own. But this was different. This wasn't just pain, it was existential collapse. I needed help finding myself in the rubble. The sessions were brutal at first. She asked questions I didn't want to answer, made me face the parts of the marriage I had ignored, my own resentments, the ways I had shut down emotionally without realizing. It would have been easier to just blame her for everything. But healing isn't about assigning blame, it's about ownership, about asking, where did I lose myself? And how do I get him back? I wrote letters to her I never sent, letters filled with rage, grief, confusion. I needed to get it all out, even if she'd never read them. I wrote about the time we danced in the kitchen barefoot to music on a Sunday morning, and how now I couldn't hear that song without wanting to. Scream. I wrote about the baby names we had argued over, and how now those arguments felt like they belonged to strangers. I wrote about the way she used to look at me, and how now I realized she hadn't looked at me like that in years. Writing became a mirror, and in that mirror, I saw both of us flawed, broken, but human. And somewhere in that humanity, I found the tiniest spark of compassion. Not for what she did, but for who she was beneath it. Because people hurt each other not always out of cruelty, but out of desperation, loneliness, and fear. And while that doesn't make it okay, it makes it make sense. Understanding is not the same as excusing. And forgiveness, real forgiveness, doesn't mean reconciliation. It means releasing yourself from the grip of hate. I wasn't there yet, but I could see the path. One night, I sat alone in the apartment and realized something quietly profound. I was still here, still breathing, still capable of love. Even if not for her, then at least for myself. And that meant something. That meant everything. Because betrayal may break your heart, but it doesn't have to break you. I didn't know what the end of this story would look like yet. I didn't know if I would return or move on for good. But for the first time since the truth came out, I wasn't afraid of the answer. Because whatever happened next, it would be my choice. Not one made out of fear or guilt or pressure, but out of clarity, out of self respect, out of truth. The truth, when it finally settles, doesn't scream, it whispers. And the whisper I kept hearing over and over again was simple. You don't owe your life to someone who broke your heart. I think I had been conditioned to believe that the length of a relationship was equal to its value. That if you spent years with someone, you must fight for it, no matter what. But that's a lie. Time is not a justification for suffering, and love without trust is just a cage built from memories. I spent my third week away diving into the smallest routines that reminded me I still existed. Morning runs before sunrise, making my own coffee exactly how I liked it, reading books I had forgotten I even owned. Each of these small things, though insignificant on the surface, stitched together something fragile and powerful: autonomy. I was learning to live on my own again, not just physically, but emotionally. She kept reaching out, not aggressively, but persistently. A picture of the kids at school, a song we used to play on road trips, a thinking of you message at midnight. Her attempts weren't cruel, they were desperate. She was trying to tether herself to the version of me who used to respond to those things with warmth. But that version of me was gone, at least for now. And in his place was someone who had seen behind the curtain. Someone who couldn't unknow what he knew. I met with her once, in a cafe halfway between our places. I hadn't planned on it. I agreed out of curiosity more than anything. What would she say face to face? Would she crumble? Would she spin the same lines? I was ready for anything, except for how normal it felt. That scared me more than anything else. How easily we fell back into our rhythms. How quickly her eyes softened when she saw me. How her voice still pulled. Memories from the past like old photographs. But underneath the familiarity was a current of something else, distance. Not just emotional, but something deeper. Like two people who once built a home together and Now we're wandering its ashes, trying to make sense of where the fire began. She didn't beg. She didn't even cry. She just looked at me, quieter than I'd ever seen her, and said she missed me. That was it. And in that moment, something cracked. Not the anger that had started fading. What cracked was the illusion I had held on to. The fantasy that someday she'd say the perfect thing, and it would all make sense, and we'd fix it. But there was no perfect thing. No magic sentence that could undo what had been done. It wasn't about what she felt. It was about what I could live with. And I realized I couldn't live with this version of us. Not anymore. I left the cafe with a strange calm in my chest. Not peace, not yet, but a kind of emotional sobriety. The fog was gone. The hope, too. But what replaced it was something steadier, a decision beginning to take form. That night, I looked around the small apartment I had been calling home for 3 weeks and saw something I hadn't seen before. Not just a temporary space, but a beginning. I called my brother, told him everything. He was the first person I spoke to fully, without filters, without downplaying it. And he listened, really listened. Then he said something I'll never forget. You don't have to forgive her to move on, but you do have to choose yourself. That hit me like a freight train because I had spent so long trying to figure out whether I could forgive her, whether I could believe her, whether I could rebuild with her. And I had never stopped to ask if I was even willing to stay. That question haunted me. And in that haunting, I found my answer. I wrote her a letter the next day, not out of anger, not to punish, but because I needed her to hear my truth without interruption. I told her I loved her, or at least I loved the person she used to be. I told her I would always care for her as the mother of my children, as the person who once held my heart with care before she crushed it. But I also told her I was choosing to step away, not just physically, but emotionally. I told her I was filing for separation, not because I hated her, but because I finally loved myself. Enough not to stay where I wasn't safe. I didn't know what the future would hold, custody battles, paperwork, awkward holiday arrangements. But I knew one thing. I would no longer live a life built on the ruins of betrayal. I pressed send. Then I sat on the floor for an hour, breathing. Just breathing. Not crying. Not shaking. Just still. And in that stillness, something sacred was born. A sense of self, of integrity, of a man who had been shattered but was no longer broken. The strange thing about endings is that they rarely feel like a single moment. They stretch, they echo, they unfold in slow waves that keep crashing long after the final word has been said. After I sent the letter, there was no immediate reaction. No phone call, no this pli, just silence. At first, that silence felt like peace. But as the days went on, it started to morph into something heavier, a kind of mourning. Not for her, not even for us, but for the life that could have been. That's what people don't talk about enough. The grief of the imagined future. The vacations you thought you'd take. The gray-haired mornings with coffee and shared memories. The birthdays, the anniversaries, the inside jokes that now just hang in the air with nowhere to land. I walked around like a man newly amputated, feeling the phantom limb of a marriage that no longer existed. People started noticing. At work, I was quieter. In public, I caught myself scanning faces that reminded me of hers, even when I didn't mean to. I saw couples holding hands and felt a twinge of both resentment and envy. Not because I wanted her back, but because they still had hope. They still had time to get it right. I had run out of chances. The kids took it the hardest. Of course they did. Children don't understand the complexities of adult heartbreak. They only understand absence. One morning, my daughter asked me, "Why can't we all live in the same house again?" And my throat closed up so tightly I couldn't answer. I just hugged her too long and whispered, "No, sweetheart. I know. I want to give her something solid. A reason. A lesson. A story that made sense." But how do you explain betrayal to a child? How do you explain that sometimes love isn't enough to keep people honest? That even good people do terrible things? You can't. So you just keep showing up. You pick them up from school. You pack their lunches. You tuck them in. You become a lighthouse in the storm. Steady, even when you're drowning yourself. Co-parenting with someone who broke your heart is an entirely different kind of endurance test. Every text feels like a splinter. Every drop-off and pickup feels like walking through a burning building and pretending you don't feel the heat. We were civil, polite even, but underneath the smiles was a quiet war of unspoken emotions. And I refused to let the kids be soldiers in that war. I had made my decision. Now I had to live it. And living it meant creating a new kind of life. Not a rebound, not a replacement, just mine. I redecorated the apartment. Nothing major, just enough to feel like a reflection of who I was now. Clean lines, bookshelves, a guitar in the corner I actually picked up again. I started cooking for myself. Real meals. Nothing fancy, but enough to remind me I deserved more than takeout and sadness. I spent weekend hiking, alone at first, then with an old friend who had gone through a divorce of his own years ago. We didn't talk much, but the silence between us was comfortable, not heavy. There's a certain kinship among people who have known the taste of betrayal. It's like a secret club no one wants to join, but once you're in, you understand each other without needing to explain. I stopped checking her social media, stopped asking mutual friends how she was doing, not because I didn't care, but because I couldn't keep pouring my energy into someone who had already made her choices. Healing meant building walls where doors used to be, not out of bitterness, but out of necessity. One evening, months after the separation began, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine and realized I hadn't thought about her for an entire day. Not once. That used to seem impossible. But there I was, not happy, not yet, but light. And that weightlessness, that absence of ache, that was freedom. I still missed parts of her sometimes. Her humor, the way she knew exactly how I liked my coffee, the way her hand fit mine. But I had also come to understand that love is not the same as compatibility. And trust, once broken, doesn't grow back like a tree. It dies like a limb, and pretending otherwise only poisons the rest of you. She reached out once more after the letter. A short message. Just 3 words. I understand now. I stared at the screen for a long time, trying to decipher what she really meant. Did she understand what she had done? What she had lost? Or did she finally understand that I was no longer the man who would come running back? I didn't respond, not out of cruelty, but because some chapters need to end without another word. Closure isn't always a conversation. Sometimes it's just a quiet moment where you exhale and realize you survived something you thought would kill you. And then you move forward, not away from the pain, but beyond it, not with resentment, but with resilience. It's funny how healing doesn't announce itself. There's no banner, no sudden revelation, no moment where the sky clears and someone hands you a certificate saying, "You're over it now." No, healing sneaks in the back door. It's the second time you laugh at a joke and realize it wasn't forced. It's waking up one morning and realizing you haven't dreamed about her or the betrayal in days. It's going to the grocery store and buying the cereal you like without thinking about anyone else's preferences. That's what freedom looks like, not in fireworks, but in small, ordinary choices that used to belong to someone else. I had expected my life post-marriage to feel empty, a hollow silence where a family used to be. But what surprised me wasn't the silence, it was the space. And space, when treated with care, becomes possibility. I began to fill that space not with noise, not with distractions, but with intention. I reconnected with hobbies I had buried under the weight of routine. I spent hours building furniture with my own hands, not because I had to, but because it reminded me I could still create. I signed up for a photography class, not to meet anyone, just because capturing light felt like a metaphor for what I was learning to do emotionally. The pain didn't vanish. I don't think it ever fully does. But it became something I could carry without it defining me. Like a scar, visible, permanent, but no longer bleeding. I started journaling about things outside the relationship. My hopes, my fears, what kind of father I wanted to be, what kind of man I was becoming. For so long, my identity had been wrapped up in being someone's husband. Now, I was becoming someone on my own terms. I took the kids camping for the first time. Just me and them. No screens, no distractions. Just the woods, a small fire, the sound of their laughter under a star-smeared sky. And in that moment, watching them roast marshmallows and tell silly stories, I realized something. I wasn't just healing from something. I was healing into something. A better father, a more present man, a version of myself who wasn't afraid of solitude, who didn't need another person's validation to feel whole. The question still came, of course, from others, from myself. Would you ever go back if she changed? Do you still love her? Are you open to meeting someone new? I didn't have neat answers. Love doesn't just disappear, it decays, transforms. And sometimes what remains isn't love at all, but memory in disguise. A longing for what was, not for what is. And that distinction matters. As for meeting someone new, I wasn't ready. Not in the sense that people usually mean. I wasn't broken anymore, just cautious. Protective. I had learned the hard way what happens when you give someone unrestricted access to your soul without confirming if they can be trusted with it. Love, I now knew, should be given freely, but never blindly. And I wasn't interested in rushing into a new chapter just to silence the echoes of the last one. I wanted to sit with the echoes, understand them, let them teach me something. Because pain, when examined, becomes wisdom. And I was hungry for wisdom. I spent a lot of nights alone, not lonely, just alone. And that solitude, which once terrified me, became sacred. I began to understand that some of the most important growth happens in the absence of noise, of distraction, of company. I learned how to be with myself without needing to escape. And that, I think, is one of the most overlooked forms of healing. Not finding someone new, but finally learning to enjoy your own company. Eventually, she asked to meet again, just to talk. Not to fix things, not to beg. Just to talk. I agreed. Not out of curiosity, not out of nostalgia, but because I no longer feared her words. That's how I knew I was healing. We met at a park. Neutral ground. She looked different. Not just physically, though. There was that too, thinner, tired, but energetically, like she was carrying her own weight now. She spoke carefully, not like someone trying to manipulate or persuade, but like someone who had finally realized the impact of her actions. She apologized again, sincerely, but not just for the betrayal, for how long she had left me alone inside the marriage. That part caught me off guard, because she was right. The affair was just the final blow. The neglect had come long before, and we were both guilty of that, of coasting, of assuming, of losing the thread between us, and pretending it wasn't unraveling. We sat in silence for a while, watching ducks drift across the water like they had no idea lives were unraveling just a few feet away. She asked if I hated her. I said no. I didn't. I didn't love her anymore either. What I felt was something else entirely, a strange blend of closure, gratitude, and quiet detachment. I thanked her for being honest, for showing up, for facing what she had broken instead of running from it. And I told her I hoped she healed too. Not because I needed her to, but because every person deserves that chance. And then, just like that, we stood, hugged briefly, and went our separate ways. No drama, no promises. Just two people who had once meant everything to each other and now meant something far more complicated and far more human. Walking away from that final meeting, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt clear, like I had finally put down a weight I had been carrying long before the betrayal ever came to light. A part of me had been holding onto that conversation like it would deliver some magical resolution, some cinematic final act that would make everything tidy. But real life doesn't offer clean endings. It gives you truth if you're brave enough to look for it. And sometimes truth is quiet. It doesn't rescue you, it reveals you. The truth I had to face was this. I had spent years trying to hold up a life that wasn't holding me back, trying to preserve something simply because it had always been there. We were both guilty of coasting, of checking boxes instead of asking real questions. The cheating was a scream that followed years of silence. But once I heard it, I couldn't unhear everything that came before. And in that final conversation with her, I finally accepted that love isn't always lost in one moment. Sometimes it's worn down by 1,000 unspoken things. 1,000 things neither of us said when we should have. And maybe the most brutal lesson of all was learning that just because a relationship ends doesn't mean it was a waste. It taught me. It broke me. It reshaped me. And now it was over. And that had to be enough. That weekend, I took the kids to a museum. My son raced through the exhibits like he was chasing the future. My daughter held my hand and asked questions with eyes so wide it reminded me that life still had magic in it, even if it wasn't the magic I thought I'd grow old with. Watching them, I felt a new kind of responsibility settle into my bones, not just to provide or protect, but to show them what resilience looked like. To show them that sometimes life tears you apart and you don't pretend it didn't happen. You build something stronger from the ruins. I didn't want them to grow up believing that love means tolerating betrayal or burying your needs to keep someone else comfortable. I wanted them to know that self-respect matters, that boundaries aren't walls. They're doors you choose who to open to. I started talking to them more honestly, not about the details. I didn't need that, but about emotions, about how it's okay to be sad, to be confused, to be angry. We colored those feelings out on paper in swirls of red and blue and black, letting their little hands translate what their hearts couldn't say yet. And in teaching them how to feel, I learned how to feel again, too. I stopped running from the quiet moments, started embracing the solitude. There was power there in choosing stillness over noise, reflection over distraction. I realized how many times I'd filled the void with activity, with people, with anything that kept me from sitting alone with myself. But you can't heal what you won't touch. And I had to touch the pain, all of it, the shame, the disappointment, the pieces of me that were still angry not just at her, but at myself for missing the signs, for staying too long, for not speaking up sooner. I forgave myself slowly, in layers. First, for being blind, then for being afraid, then for being human. And that was the hardest part, accepting that I had done my best with what I knew at the time, that I wasn't perfect, but I wasn't broken either. Just learning. And growth doesn't always look like triumph. Sometimes it looks like crying on your kitchen floor at midnight because the silence is too loud. Sometimes it looks like saying no when you're used to saying yes. Sometimes it looks like waking up and realizing you're not angry anymore, just tired. And that's its own kind of progress. Around month 4 of the separation, I noticed something that felt almost like a miracle. I started looking forward, not just surviving the day, but wanting things again. I started imagining a future that didn't include her. It didn't feel sad. It felt open, like an unwritten page instead of a torn one. I started thinking about the kind of relationship I'd want someday, not out of loneliness, but from a place of clarity. I didn't want perfect. I didn't want a fairy tale. I wanted truth, communication, a love that felt like rest, not work. A partner who chose me fully, every day, even when it wasn't easy. I made a list, not of what I wanted in someone else, but of what I wanted to be for someone else. I wanted to show up, to listen better, to never let routine replace intimacy, to speak up when something felt off, to never assume love was enough, because love without effort, without awareness, without care is just a word. And maybe I needed to be shattered to understand that. Maybe we all do at some point. I didn't rush anything. I didn't date right away. I wasn't interested in using someone to numb the ache. I wanted to arrive whole, not half healed. And slowly, day by day, I was getting there. Not back to who I was, but forward to who I was becoming. And that person, he was stronger, wiser, kinda, not in spite of the betrayal, but because of what he chose to do with it. The world didn't pause just because mine had. Bills still came. Work still needed my attention. The seasons kept changing without asking how I felt about it. And in that, I found something steady, a rhythm that didn't depend on emotion. The world moves, and eventually, so do we. Even grief has its expiration, not because it becomes less significant, but because we eventually get tired of carrying it everywhere we go. I found myself walking differently, not slouched under the invisible weight of what could have been, but upright, grounded. People started telling me I seemed different, lighter, more focused. I hadn't noticed it myself, but they were right. Something in me had shifted. There was a new boundary around my soul, like a quiet force. Field. I didn't know anyone an explanation for my healing. I didn't have to justify why I wasn't bitter or why. Wasn't chasing revenge. Forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about putting the blade down before you cut yourself deeper, try to hurt someone else. And I had already bled enough. One evening, I came across an old photo album, the kind we used to keep before everything went digital. There we were, smiling at the beach, laughing at some party, holding newborns with eyes full of sleep and hope. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just stared. Those people weren't fake. They weren't pretending. They were just who we were back then. And I realized something powerful. Both versions were real. The love and the loss. The joy and the ruin. One doesn't cancel the other. I could honor what we had without needing to recreate it. I could appreciate our past without being shackled to it. That's what healing gives you. Not erasure, but perspective. It lets you look at the fire and still remember the warmth, even if it eventually burned everything down. I packed the album back carefully, not because I was clinging to it, but because some memories deserve preservation, even if their future has changed. The kids began adjusting too. They stopped asking when I was coming back home. They stopped looking for both parents in every room. It broke my heart a little, that quiet acceptance. But it also reminded me that children are resilient. They don't need a perfect family. They need a safe one, a consistent one, a loving one. And I could give them that, even if it looked different now. I started introducing them to small rituals that were ours and ours alone. Saturday pancakes, evening walks where we'd pick one mystery to solve together. We'd talk about everything: school, dreams, dinosaurs, space. And in those conversations, I remembered how much I still had to live for. Not just for them, but with them, fully. Honestly, the way I wished I had lived inside my marriage. I was more present now than I'd ever been. And not because I was trying to be, but because nothing was distracting me for what mattered. No unspoken tension, no quiet emotional war. Just life, raw, imperfect, and real. Around month 5, a friend set me up on a coffee meeting. Not a date. Not exactly. Just two people who had both been through their own versions of hell and were learning to live again. Her name was Claire. She had eyes that looked like she'd seen storms and learned how to dance in them anyway. We didn't talk about our past much. Not at first. We talked about books, music, the weirdness of starting over in your 30s. There was no pressure, no performance. Just two people tired of pretending, sharing a table and a little space where honesty could breathe. I didn't fall in love. Not yet. But I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Curiosity. Not just about her, but about possibility. About what else life might offer once the dust settled. Vomit again. Then again. No expectations. No labels. Just conversations that didn't feel like tests. And for the first time in what felt like years, I didn't feel like I had to shrink parts of myself to be accepted. I was enough, as I was. Wounded, wiser, still healing. I didn't tell her everything at once. You can't unload your whole history onto someone and expect them to carry it for you. But I was honest when it mattered. I told her I had been broken, that I had been rebuilt, that I wasn't looking for a crutch. I was looking for connection, not to fill a void, but to grow something real. She understood. Maybe because she'd walked a similar path. Maybe because real recognizes real. But whatever it was, it felt safe. And after everything, that meant more than sparks or chemistry or passion. It felt like peace. And peace, I learned, is love without fear. I didn't know where things with her would go. I didn't rush it. I was still rebuilding, still discovering. But the very fact that I was open again, that I could look into someone's eyes and not see ghosts, told me that I had come further than I realized. Healing is never linear. It circles back. It stings on birthdays. It whispers doubts when you least expect it. But eventually, the voice of pain gets quieter, and the voice of self-trust gets louder. I was finally listening. The moment I realized I didn't need closure from her anymore, only clarity for myself. Everything shifted. We're taught to believe closure is a gift the person who hurt us gives back, like a receipt for the pain. But it's not. Closure isn't given, it's claimed. It's a line you draw with your own hand when the story no longer serves you. And mine had served its purpose. I had loved. I had lost. I had learned. And now, I was living again, not in reaction to the past, but in alignment with the man I had become because of it. Claire and I kept seeing each other. Still no pressure. Still no expectations. Just two people showing up consistently. She was gentle in ways I didn't know I needed. Not just in how she touched or spoke, but in how she didn't demand more than I could give. That was new. That was everything. We didn't talk about forever. We talked about today, about what it meant to be present, about how sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay open, even after you've been torn apart. I told her one night, over quiet jazz and cold wine, that I wasn't sure if I was capable of loving fully again, that some part of me still flinched at vulnerability, that intimacy, at times, felt like stepping onto a minefield barefoot. She didn't try to fix me. She just listened, held space. And in that space, something sacred was born: trust. Not the blind kind, the chosen kind, the kind that's earned one unguarded moment at a time. Meanwhile, life kept moving. Co-parenting became a new normal. The logistics, the scheduling, the inevitable awkward moments, they became manageable. Not easy, but familiar. We even found ways to communicate without tension, though it would never be warm. It didn't need to be. Civility was enough. The kids were adjusting too. Their questions became fewer. Their smiles came quicker. They no longer saw two homes as a tragedy, just two places where they were loved differently. And that was a win, a quiet, important win. I started writing again. Nothing public, just for me. Pages and pages of thoughts, memories, realizations. Some of it raw, some of it ugly, but all of it real. And in those pages, I saw myself from above, not just as the man who had been betrayed, but as someone who had survived with his integrity intact. That mattered more than I had realized. I had chosen the hard path, the one without shortcuts. I didn't numb. I didn't retaliate. I didn't build a new life on top of the rubble of the old one without first clearing the debris. And because of that, everything now felt earned. Every moment of peace, every breath of joy, every laugh that came without guilt. The more distance I had from the past, the clearer it became. I had loved her. I had truly, deeply loved her. And that love had been real, even if she broke it. And she did. She shattered it. But that didn't mean I had to keep carrying the shards. The love was real. The pain was real. The betrayal was real. All of it was real. And that meant I could let go without lying to myself about what had been. I stopped seeing myself as a victim. Not because the betrayal didn't hurt, but because I chose not to let it define me. She was a chapter, not the whole book. And as I turned the pages, I found myself writing a story that had nothing to do with her anymore. One night, Claire and I went on a late drive. No destination, just city lights and quiet roads. She asked me what I wanted. Most out of life now. And without thinking, I said, peace. A life where nothing feels like walking on eggshells. Where love feels like air, not armor. She smiled, didn't say much, just reached for my hand. And in that gesture, so simple, so small, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: safe. Not excited, not overwhelmed, not infatuated, just safe. And sometimes that's what real love feels like. Not fireworks, but a homecoming. A soft place to land. I still had rough days. Triggers. Old photos. Dates on the calendar that whispered memories. But those moments no longer drowned me. They brushed past me like wind through trees. Felt, acknowledged, and then gone. Because the storm had passed. I had survived it. And more than that, I had grown through it. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at her, not at myself, not at the world. I was grateful, not for the betrayal, but for the clarity it forced, for the awakening, for the fact that I had been tested in the deepest way and chosen to rise rather than rot. That's the thing about heartbreak. It either hardens you or humbles you. And I chose humility. I chose to look at the rubble and build something better. Not bitter, better. Not a version of myself created out of spite, but one forged in truth. And that truth, it had set me free. After years of carrying the weight of expectations, not just from her, but from myself, I finally understood that healing was not a destination, but a journey that loops and spirals. There is no finish line, only milestones where you pause and realize how far you've come. One of those moments came when I sat in a crowded cafe and realized I was no longer scanning the room for familiar faces or lost in thought about what was missing. Instead, I was present, drinking my coffee and listening to the hum of life around me. It felt ordinary, and that ordinariness was everything. Because sometimes healing isn't dramatic, it's quiet acceptance. It's letting go of the need to control the story and trusting that the next chapter will write itself. My relationship with Claire deepened slowly, like a creek carving a canyon. Patient, persistent, and humble. We built trust not in grand gestures, but in small moments. Sharing a book, cooking dinner, walking dogs on chilly mornings. She became a mirror reflecting the parts of myself I'd forgotten to nurture, the parts that were curious, playful, and hopeful. I started thinking about love differently, not as a rescue, but as a choice. Not as a fixation on perfection, but as an embrace of flaws. I learned that the most important relationship in my life was the one I had with myself. I had spent so long trying to be what someone else wanted that I lost sight of who I truly was. Now, I was rediscovering myself, not through her eyes, but through my own. That shift rippled into every part of my life. I became more patient with the kids, more honest with friends, more fearless in pursuing what made me happy. I didn't need to carry the past like a scarlet letter. I carried it like a map, a reminder of the journey that made me stronger. Still, the wounds never fully disappear. There are nights when the silence is loud and memories come unbidden. There are moments when I wonder if I made the right choices or if I was too quick to let go. But those moments don't define me. They're part of the human experience. Messy, complicated, unpredictable. And I've learned to hold those feelings without judgment. Forgiveness remains the hardest lesson. Not because I struggle to forgive her, but because forgiving myself for staying as long as I did is a challenge. For accepting that I couldn't fix what wasn't mine to fix. For realizing that love isn't always enough to save a relationship. But in forgiving, I found liberation. Freedom from blame. Freedom to rebuild on my own terms. I hope that anyone reading this who's standing at a similar crossroads understands this. You are not alone. Betrayal feels like the end, but it can also be a beginning. The pain you feel is real and valid, but it doesn't have to define your future. You get to choose how to move forward with bitterness or with grace, with anger or with strength, with despair or with hope. Choose hope. Choose yourself. Choose a life where your heart is both brave and protected, because that is the kind of love that lasts, the kind that starts from within. I don't know what tomorrow holds, but I know I'm ready for it. Not because I'm perfect, but because I'm whole. And that makes all the difference.